As the Cold War era came to an end, Poland was the leading light in the wave of former communist states transitioning to democracy. It was among the first to join both NATO and the European Union. Today, the first majority government elected there since 1989 is a nationalist, conservative, law and justice party government that's provoking protest from tens of thousands of citizens and concern from its European neighbors. Joining us now to find out why, via Skype in Oxford, UK, Karolina Wigura, a fellow at the University of Oxford. She teaches political philosophy at the University of Warsaw and is co-founder of the online political journal Kultura Liberalna, Liberal Culture. And in College Park, Maryland, Piotr Kaczynski. He is professor of European history at the University of Maryland. Dobry wieczór to you both, and thank you for coming on TVO tonight. Piotr, I want to start with you. I'm going to suggest that the two most famous Poles of our lifetime would be Pope John Paul II and Lech Wałęsa, and some very interesting and potentially disturbing information about the former head of the Solidarity Union recently came out, and I want to get your take on it. Piotr, there have been documents come out suggesting that, in fact, he was a collaborator, Wałęsa was, with the communist regime, which may have some tarnish on his image as this great leader of democracy in Poland all those years ago. What's your view on whether or not the documents suggesting this are in fact authentic?
Well, so what happened is that the widow of the former Minister of the Interior, who had run the communist secret police, came forward offering to sell documents that she had found that her husband had been keeping. So it's not hard to believe the sensationalist reaction to the news of these documents. The thing is that the actual contents of those documents are not really all that new or not really all that revelatory. The fundamental question is, with Wałęsa, what happened before the year 1976? What happened after the year 1976? We know him as the founder of the major trade union, breakthrough trade union movement Solidarity in 1980. We can't be sure as to the authenticity of all of the documents from the years 1970 to 76 that have turned up, but it does look like he worked together, informed to some extent, maybe even gave information that harmed some of his colleagues from those years. We can't be sure yet, but none of that is actually new. These rumors have been circulating actually since the 1980s.
Let me follow up with Karolina on that point, because of course in the West, Wałęsa is thought to be one of the great heroes who presaged the end of the Cold War and the end of the Soviet Empire, frankly. And yet there are these pesky rumors, I guess, that he may have been more involved with the former regime than we think. Why such a diverse interpretation of views of Wałęsa's role in history?
Wałęsa is surely a legend, and he is also a symbol of the Third Republic. And this is very important to understand the situation, because the current government in Poland, law and justice government, is actually trying to delegitimize the system of the Third Republic. And Wałęsa is the symbol of the Third Republic. So although Piotr is of course right to say that we haven't actually learned a lot of new things about Wałęsa, we have known a lot about what he has been doing before 1976, perhaps not in details, but we did know that he has signed something, and we did know about the controversy. So PiS is trying to play this happening that was caused by a wife of General Kiszczak in order to push its own program of new ideological program of Poland.
Now, Karolina, you just heard Piotr say that none of this changes what he thinks of Lech Wałęsa. How about you? Does it change how you feel about him?
I think it's not the most important thing what I think. I think the whole situation shows the complexity of Polish attitude towards the past. Many believe that the problem we are observing now in Poland is actually connected with the fact we have never learned to talk about controversies that are connected with the past and with the history of regaining democracy. So apart from Wałęsa, we have other examples of people or situations that are differently interpreted by leftists or liberals or rightists. And if you look at the programs of in Polish schools, for example, you can see that these controversies were actually not shown as points or persons about which we should discuss. So somehow we have missed the chance in the past 25 years to learn that the controversies about history are important.
Well, you mentioned the word history, and I want to take just a moment here to do a little Polish History 101, because I suspect a lot of our viewers may not remember that if we were having this conversation 100 years ago, Poland did not exist. So let's go through some of the history, because in fact, a century ago, Poland did not exist as a country. It only became one again in 1918, and for 123 years, it was partitioned between Prussia, Russia, and Austria. It was an independent country for 21 years until the outbreak of World War II in 1939, when, of course, Nazi Germany attacked Poland in the west and the Soviets did in the east. During the war, almost 6 million Polish citizens died, 3 million of them Jews. After the war, with newly changed borders, Poland became a communist country and remained so until 1989, when the first free elections in Eastern Europe ultimately led to the fall of the Berlin Wall and the disintegration of the Soviet Union. In 1999, Poland joined NATO, and in 2004, it became a member of the European Union. All right, with all of that background now in place, let's continue on. Piotr, to you for this next one. The new government, which came into power last fall, has a very different understanding of what happened in Poland since 1989. Help us understand what the disagreement is all about.
Well, so what Karolina just said about civic education and the place that history does or doesn't play in Polish public culture is incredibly important. Essentially, 1989 for the past 25 years has been a story of triumph, as promoted from the top in news media, but not uniformly agreed upon. And actually, it has not really trickled down at all into the younger generations. I had personally been very heartened in the past decade to see one museum after another take steam as a project in Poland, whether the Museum of the Warsaw Uprising, Museum of the History of Polish Jews, the Solidarity Center up in Gdańsk. But my sense is that these museums have created a kind of scissors, if you will, generationally, in between generations that were old enough to feel like they had a stake in 1989 and generations that are only now starting to assimilate a sense of what 1989 might have meant. In between, you have the generations that went through what you were just describing, Steve, looking toward Poland entering NATO, looking toward Poland entering the EU, without really fully having a sense of what that would mean in practical terms for them. And sure, some of them have gotten to travel on scholarships to European universities or join banks in different European centers of commerce and cultural life, but others feel like they've missed the boat. Others feel like they weren't actually part of this transition. And that is something to which peace has been able to play beautifully across different generations.
So, Karolina, is part of the problem here that some people in Poland today don't feel that the communists have been punished enough over the past quarter century?
Yes, I think the feeling that the transitional justice has actually not been done as it should have been is important. But you must also understand that here we have an example of a great discussion that has started 25 years ago in Poland, which is a discussion about the shape of Polish modernity. So there are basically two sides here. One side would probably say a liberal, European, and open society modernization would be better for Poland. The second side says, well, yes, democratic, okay, but we would like more patriotic values, we would like more Catholic values. And of course, these two camps, as we say, these two Polands are looking very suspiciously towards each other. So you can say that the triumph of the law and justice government is somehow exchange of the two camps at power. And so they have come to power with a strength and the ideological dimension that has never been present in Polish politics before.
Let me bring one more very important historic moment into the discussion now, Piotr, and put it to you. It was almost exactly 6 years ago that terrible plane crash happened in which the Polish president Lech Kaczynski and his wife and 94 other people, very high-ranking people from the military and political establishment, were all killed. How did that tragedy play into the deepening divides, Piotr, in Poland?
It played in a fundamental way. What it has done, let's think about this a few different ways. In terms of creating a hardcore constituency, an electoral constituency for peace, it formulated something that has become known really as the Smolensk cult, the cult of the place in Russia where the plane went down. Now, that plane had been carrying people who were traveling to Russia to commemorate the 70th anniversary of the Katyn massacres, in which the Soviet secret police murdered about 22,000 Polish officers and reservists in 1940. So in some sense, it was about historical memory itself from the get-go. What has happened since then, though, is you had the original history telescoped into this idea that, well, maybe there's a conspiracy to be found. Maybe the Russians had a hand in it. Maybe, in fact, the sitting Polish government had a hand in it. And a number of the folks who now hold governmental posts in Poland were involved in propagating this cult and involved in building a hardcore constituency for their party and floating the possibility that maybe there's yet another thing that the liberal elites, whom Karolina was talking about before, have been hiding something, have been covering something up. So what it does is it gives another reason for certain groups of people to buy into peace's narrative. And for the young, it creates a certain amount of confusion. Maybe they don't buy into it. I know plenty of people in their 20s and 30s who voted for peace, who think that Smolensk and the conspiracy theory are crazy. But they still agree that it's a fuzzy spot that the previous government was never able to figure out, to their discredit.
And Karolina, how widespread do you think this belief that the plane crash was a conspiracy and has helped the governing party rise into power, how widespread throughout Polish society do you think that belief is?
Unfortunately, we have exact numbers. Opinion polls give us the number 22% of Poles actually believe that it might have been a conspiracy. Smolensk could have been organized by some forces, whether Russian or perhaps some Polish and Russian forces together.
I'm trying to get a better understanding, Piotr, as to whether or not the law and justice phenomenon is the same kind of thing in Poland as we have seen in other parts of the world. Maybe I'm pushing this comparison too far, and you tell me. But we had a populist mayor in Toronto, Rob Ford. We're seeing what's happening in the United States right now with Donald Trump and with Bernie Sanders, for that matter. The people who have felt excluded, who feel outside of the typical levers of power. Is that part of the phenomenon in Poland that has allowed this party, with a relatively small percentage of the total vote in the election, 38%, to get a majority government and govern?
Well, so Washington Post columnist Jackson Deal made the comparison between Trump and Kaczynski already a few months ago in print. And a Princeton political theorist named Jan Werner Müller made the argument that this Kaczynski rise is in fact part of an illiberal international, which is covering, if not large parts of Europe, then at least substantial parts of Eastern Europe. I think you could add to the list of names you mentioned before, Steve, Viktor Orban in Hungary, certainly Vladimir Putin in Russia. Some folks would add Marine Le Pen in France. It does feel like there's a moment, if not global, then at least Euro-American, of crisis, where we have surprising groups of people whom we feel like they've been actually educated and acculturated with a certain sense of public history and public culture, turning out to express their anger and resentment. Now in Poland, I see what really bothers me actually is what happens among 20 and 30 somethings, who in my view have for the most part either sort of turned off and tuned out when it comes to peace coming into power, or in fact felt like they had so much to protest despite rampant economic. Poland was really the only European country not dramatically negatively affected by the 2008 financial crisis. So still there are young people who feel like they got the raw end of the deal vis-a-vis their people their age who were going to the London School of Economics, who were going to Utrecht, who were studying different parts of Europe and starting to make a lot of money. And they recently voted for this rock star named Paweł Kukiz, who showed up as kind of a protest vote. And this certainly wasn't the first time we saw a protest vote in recent years in either Eastern European or European politics. But now the protest vote quickly became a gateway. And that gateway opened in order to find peace, getting not just sort of the traditional 60, 70, 80-year-olds or so block of voters who had started moving over perhaps to believing in the Smolensk cult, but the youngest generations too, who felt like they had some skin in the game and no one else had any message that even remotely expressed what they wanted to say.
So Carolina, let's look at the other side of the coin and get a better understanding of the tens of thousands of people that have been in the streets lately protesting the measures of this new government. What is their concern?
You mean the Committee of Defense of Democracy, the CODE, of course.
Yes.
Well, a CODE is a very interesting phenomenon, but we might be afraid that it is a typical Facebook revolution. It means that some of the part of the society in Warsaw and other great cities is now very much mobilized to protest against the new government's politics. But if you look at the numbers, if you look at the people who are actually joining CODE, these are not the problematic 20 or 30 something people whom were mentioned by Piotr. So you have a paradoxical situation in which democracy is again defended by the people or the generation of people who has once already gained democracy in this country. Whereas the new generation, the 20 and the 30 something people, are actually either voting for cookies or they are completely not interested in politics and not interested in the future of the Third Republic. And I think this is the most alarming aspect of the whole situation.
Piotr, could you tell us whether you believe, because, I mean, I have to tell you, Poland has had an excellent reputation in the West over the last 25 years, and we've had Leszek Balcerowicz on this program, we've had Radek Sikorski on this program. They both present so beautifully on the Polish possibilities of joining the West and the economic so-called miracle of Poland. But now we're hearing many disquieting things about Polish democracy being in trouble. Do you think it is?
I do. I don't know what's going to happen 10 years from now, but I have no reason to be hopeful in the next 6 months or so. Okay, I'm not a political scientist, but the past experience has shown me, you would think for the 1989, famous as a miracle year, right? The past 25 years facilitating this kind of beacon of democracy that you've rightly been talking about. Consciousness of that is really low. The only hopes that I see are in strengthening the kind of civic education that I mentioned a few minutes ago, right? But I think what the electoral results we've been discussing have shown, as much as anything else, is that it's a generational problem. And this generation that is either apathetic or interested mostly in protest voting, in resentment, whether we're talking about Poland or elsewhere in the world, they're not going away anytime soon. And they believe that they've found their own approach to trying to get their voice heard.
Carolina, do you have similar fears for the future of, shall we call it, Western-style democracy in Poland?
Well, I have similar fears, but not only about Western-style democracy in Poland, but also in other European countries. Because you might say that, for example, the phenomenon that has been described as normalization of the far extremist right language in the center of the politics, it is a phenomenon that has been described, firstly, not in Eastern or Central Eastern Europe, but in Western Europe. So you could say that paradoxically, what is happening in Poland, it is a paradoxical, not welcome imitation of what is happening to France, or Front National, or of what is happening to Austria and its Freedom Party. If you look, for example, at the most controversial utterances of Jarosław Kaczynski, like, for example, the sentence he has uttered about the refugees, that they might be carrying parasites and protozoa. You can compare it with a very similar sentence by Marine Le Pen from Front National, who has actually said that the Syrian refugees are a bacterial immigration. So there is surely something happening to democracy all over Europe or all over the West. And I would say it is a populist turn. It is a turn towards emotions. It is perhaps caused partly by generational change. It is very important here, not only that the young generation thinks in a new way, but also that the older generations do not understand the youngsters anymore. Also, perhaps it is connected with the social media, with Facebook, with a kind of communication which is dominant nowadays.
Piotr, let me get you to amplify on the name that Karolina mentioned in that last answer, Jarosław Kaczynski. Now, from what I understand, he's neither the premier nor the president, but he's got all the power. So explain that to me.
That's right. Well, so there's an analogy that I've heard bandied around, which I like quite a lot. You know, from the late 1940s until the late 1980s in the communist bloc, we were looking at party residing in the hands of general secretaries of communist parties, even if the parties didn't go by that name. So frankly, it didn't matter if there was an office of president or who held the office of prime minister, if that was the nominal one. What mattered was who was secretary of the party. And here we have the leader of a party who does not have, as you said, constitutional office, and yet in fact is the person sending marching orders down the line to both the prime minister and the president. Now, constitutionally, this makes no sense. There have been lots of arguments among constitutional scholars, not arguments, constitutional scholars have been pretty blunt about saying that the oaths taken by the folks actually occupying government offices right now don't allow them to indulge this kind of behavior. But they've been loyal to their party leader, and loyalty to their party leader is what can really lead us down the darker corridors away from the kind of liberal democracy we think about.
Karolina, he has been quoted as saying, "I would like to be a retired savior of our nation." What do you think he is trying to save the Polish nation from?
So let's talk a little bit about the demonology of Poland, as I call it. Jarosław Kaczynski is convinced that the Third Republic of Poland is actually an evil system, a morally evil system. This means that in his opinion or his rhetoric, we don't know whether this is only cynical or this is what he really means. But he says that this system has been founded on very evil moral foundations, meaning that the communists and the part of the opposition have compromised in a wicked way. And so the very beginning of the system is an evil thing. Connected with that is, of course, his attitude towards the law in the Third Republic. He believes it is also morally evil and it must be changed. So you could see it, for example, on the example of the Constitution Tribunal, when the arguments were that actually law is, of course, important, but the nation is more important than law, and if the nation and peace says that they are now the representatives of nation, so if the nation wants to change the rules on which the Constitutional Tribunal works, they have to do it. They have to get the right to change it. So in a way, Jarosław Kaczynski is demonizing the Third Republic. The problem, I think, is that also the liberal side, as I say, liberal Poland, believes that, on the other hand, Jarosław Kaczynski is somehow an evil person, a person who is going to introduce some kind of a totalitarianism in Poland. And I think this is a negative phenomenon, these two demonologies from both sides.
Karolina Wigura and Piotr Kościcki, it's awfully good of both of you to join us on TVO tonight. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Do widzenia.
Do widzenia.
Do widzenia.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit supporttvo.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.